The polished marble halls of diplomacy hide secrets darker than most imagine. Behind the carefully crafted press statements and meticulously planned international summits lies a world where power, privilege, and human weakness collide, often with devastating consequences. Today's story takes us back to the final days of British Hong Kong, when the Union Jack still flew over Victoria Harbor. The year was 1997, a pivotal moment when the world watched the historic handover of this crown jewel back to Chinese control after 156 years of colonial rule. Amid this political transition, British diplomats stationed in Hong Kong walked a delicate tightrope, balancing waning imperial influence with uncertain future relations. Among them was one distinguished figure, a senior diplomat whose name once commanded respect across embassy corridors from London to Beijing. His reputation was impeccable, Oxford-educated, decorated for service, and positioned for eventual ambassadorship. His family embodied British diplomatic aristocracy. His wife herself a former cultural attaché, whose connections extended throughout Asia's elite circles. Their daughter, a bright university student, represented the perfect image of privileged diplomatic offspring. But beneath this polished exterior lurked a catastrophic lapse in judgment that would destroy 4 lives and end a promising career. Before we continue this shocking story, take a moment to subscribe to True Crime Stories. Hit that notification bell to ensure you never miss our weekly explorations of human fallibility and its consequences. If you appreciate real stories told with respect to the truth, your subscription helps us continue this work. What began as intellectual mentorship between a powerful man and his daughter's university roommate, a brilliant political science student from a prominent Hong Kong family, gradually warped into something inappropriate and destructive. Their initial conversations about international relations and career guidance slowly transformed, crossing boundaries that should never have been breached. The affair itself might have remained concealed within the discreet world of diplomatic privilege. After all, the halls of power have always contained their share of indiscretions. But what made this particular scandal noteworthy wasn't merely the relationship. It was a spectacular implosion that followed its discovery. The final months of British administration in Hong Kong created a pressure cooker environment. Government officials worked around the clock, finalizing handover details. Security concerns mounted as the July 1st transfer date approached. Media organizations from around the globe descended on the territory, hungry for any story that might illuminate this historic transition. Within this charged atmosphere, the diplomat continued his double life. Meetings disguised as professional mentorship. Late-night phone calls explained away as work emergencies. Documents and briefs serving as excuses for private encounters. His position, meant to represent British values and interests, became a ability for pursuing personal desires. His wife, overwhelmed with social obligations tied to the handover ceremonies, noticed little beyond her husband's increased workload. Their daughter, focused on completing her university studies before political transition, continued bringing her roommate to family gatherings, unaware of the betrayal unfolding. Hong Kong in those final colonial days buzzed with anticipation and anxiety. The territory's famous skyline, a testament to capitalism's success on China's doorstep, served as backdrop to diplomatic receptions where British officials made their final appearances as administrative authorities. At one such event, a photographer captured what would become the first piece of evidence. The diplomat and young woman, standing too close, exchanging a glance too intimate for professional boundaries. When the scandal eventually broke, it didn't merely end a marriage or a career. It shattered multiple lives across 2 continents and embarrassed a government already navigating the complicated emotions of imperial retreat. This is not a story of political intrigue or international espionage, though unfolded against that backdrop. Rather, it's a painfully human tale of poor choices, selfishness, and the rippling damage that follows when someone in a position of trust violates that sacred responsibility. The handover of Hong Kong marked the end of an era for British foreign policy. For one diplomat's family, it marked something far more personal, the beginning of their own private catastrophe. To understand how someone could risk so much, we must first understand the man at the center of this tragedy. Born into an upper-middle-class family in Hampshire, the diplomat represented the 3rd generation in his family to serve the crown abroad. His grandfather had administered colonial territories in West Africa, while his father had served in India during the final years before independence. From childhood, he was groomed for international service. Educated at Harrow before proceeding to Oxford, where he studied politics, philosophy, and economics, the traditional pathway for those destined for government service. His academic record was stellar but not exceptional. What set him apart was his natural ability to navigate social hierarchies and build strategic relationships. He entered the Foreign Office in 1975 through the Fast Track program, quickly earning postings that colleagues might wait years to secure. His early career included positions in Bonn and Washington, D.C., where he displayed an uncanny talent for cultivating useful connections. A former colleague once remarked, he could walk into a room full of strangers and leave with 10 business cards from exactly the right people. By his mid-30s, he had secured his first substantive role as first secretary at the British Embassy in Tokyo. The position coincided with Japan's economic boom years, allowing him to develop expertise in Asian financial markets, knowledge that would later prove invaluable for his Hong Kong posting. His dispatches to London were praised for their insight, and he earned commendation for negotiating favorable terms on several Anglo-Japanese trade initiatives. In Tokyo, he met his future wife, herself a diplomatic officer specializing in cultural affairs. Born to a family with banking connections, she brought both social capital and genuine expertise in Asian cultural dynamics to their partnership. While he focused on political and economic relations, she excelled at the soft diplomacy of cultural exchange programs and arts initiatives. They married in 1986, and within their professional circles, they were viewed as the perfect diplomatic couple. Their daughter was born a year later, and for several years, his wife stepped back from her diplomatic career to focus on family. When she later returned to work, it was in a part-time capacity that allowed her to balance professional interests with the social obligations expected of a diplomat spouse. The family's ascent continued through the early 1990s with postings of increasing responsibility in Brussels and briefly in New Delhi. By 1994, when he secured the senior position in Hong Kong, he had accumulated enough professional accomplishments to fill several pages of his official biography. His specialty had become economic transitions and trade negotiations, making him an ideal candidate for the delicate work of maintaining British commercial interests during Hong Kong's handover preparations. Upon arriving in Hong Kong, the family quickly established themselves within the colony's rarefied social strata. They took residence in a government-provided home on the Peak, the exclusive neighborhood that had long symbolized colonial privilege in Hong Kong. From this literal and figurative height, they entered the tight-knit community of expatriate officials, local business leaders, and visiting dignitaries. His wife proved particularly adept at navigating Hong Kong society. Her background in cultural affairs made her a valuable bridge between British authorities and local Chinese elites. She organized exhibitions featuring both British and Chinese artists, hosted literary salons that brought together diverse intellectual voices, and served on charitable boards addressing education and heritage preservation. Their social calendar filled with receptions at the governor's mansion, charity galas at five-star hotels, yacht outings in Victoria Harbor, and weekend retreats to exclusive country clubs in the New Territories. Their daughter attended an international school whose alumni included children of business tycoons and government officials from across Asia. Yet behind this impressive professional and social facade, certain character traits raised occasional concerns among close observers. A former private secretary noted his remarkable self-assurance that sometimes bordered on arrogance. Another colleague mentioned his selective memory when it came to acknowledging others' contributions to successful initiatives. Most troubling was his growing sense of entitlement, a common hazard for those who spend decades in positions of authority far from home oversight. He increasingly displayed impatience with administrative procedures and expected exceptions to rules that constrained others. When challenged, he would casually reference his personal connections to senior officials in London. There was always a sense that normal constraints didn't quite apply to him, recalled a junior embassy staff member years later. Not in a corrupt way. He wasn't taking bribes or anything that obvious. It was more subtle, this absolute certainty that his judgment trumped institutional wisdom. This combination, extraordinary professional achievement, social prominence, and a dangerous belief in his own exceptionalism, created perfect conditions for the catastrophic errors in judgment that would follow. The young woman entered this story as countless others do in university settings worldwide, through random housing assignments. In the autumn of 1996, she became roommates with the diplomat's daughter at Hong Kong University, where both were pursuing undergraduate degrees. At just 20 years old, this young woman already possessed a kind of academic record and family background that opened doors. The eldest daughter of a prominent banking family with deep roots in Hong Kong's financial sector, she had graduated at the top of her class from an elite international school before choosing to study political science and international relations. Her decision to remain in Hong Kong rather than attend university abroad reflected her ambition to position herself advantageously for the coming political transition. Unlike many of her wealthy peers who treated university as merely a social stepping stone, she approached her studies with genuine intellectual passion. Professors noted her exceptional analytical abilities and her uncommon grasp of geopolitical complexities. One instructor would later tell investigators that she possessed the rare combination of theoretical understanding and practical instinct that marks those destined for significant roles in international affairs. The diplomat's daughter and this young woman formed a friendship based initially on their shared interest in global politics and their common experience as members of privileged families navigating the competitive university environment. Their connection, while not extraordinarily close, was comfortable enough that weekend invitations to family gatherings became routine by the second month of the academic year. The first such visit occurred during a mid-autumn celebration at the diplomat's residence on the Peak. The young woman arrived bearing a thoughtful gift, a first-edition book on British-Chinese relations that demonstrated her awareness of her host's professional interests. During dinner, she asked insightful questions about the diplomatic service and the ongoing handover preparations, displaying knowledge that impressed both the diplomat and his wife. "My husband was quite taken with her intellect," the wife would later tell a friend. "It's rare to meet undergraduates with such a sophisticated understanding of international relations." What began as polite dinner conversation evolved over subsequent visits. The diplomat began recommending specific readings on diplomatic history and international law. The young woman, in turn, would arrive at family gatherings prepared to discuss these materials, often staying after other guests had departed to continue conversations with her roommate's father. By December 1996, these interactions had established a pattern. The diplomat suggested books. The young woman read them diligently. He posed theoretical questions about international relations. She responded with well-considered answers that increasingly aligned with his own perspectives. What appeared to family members as an admirable mentoring relationship between an experienced diplomat and a promising student contained subtle undercurrents visible only in retrospect. The transition from appropriate academic guidance to something more problematic occurred gradually, with boundaries eroding through seemingly innocuous steps. After one family dinner in January 1997, the diplomat offered to give a young woman a tour of his home office, showing her diplomatic memorabilia and official photographs not displayed in the main house. His daughter, busy with other guests, thought nothing of this private tour. Soon after, he began offering to review her academic papers, a reasonable extension of mentorship, but one that created opportunities for private communication outside family gatherings. Their exchanges moved from handwritten notes with academic feedback to lengthy email correspondence, often continuing late into the evening. By February, he had invited her to attend a public lecture on a handover at the Foreign Correspondence Club, introducing her to professional contacts as an exceptional student with diplomatic potential. While this could be viewed as generous networking assistance, it also served to establish her presence in the professional sphere, separate from family connections. When his wife noticed the growing frequency of these interactions, the diplomat framed his interest in professional terms. The Foreign Office needs bright minds who understand both British and Chinese perspectives. Someone with her background could be valuable to diplomatic relations post-handover. This explanation seemed reasonable, even admirable. Who wouldn't want to help guide a promising young person toward a meaningful career? Yet in these seemingly innocent mentoring sessions, professional boundaries were already beginning to blur. Conversations extended beyond academic topics to personal ambitions and private frustrations. Compliments became more frequent, more personal, and less relevant to academic performance. By spring, what had begun as appropriate academic guidance had transformed into something neither would openly acknowledge, a relationship charged with inappropriate attraction disguised as professional interest. March 1997 marked a turning point in this relationship. What had been justified as professional mentorship began its inevitable transformation into something far more inappropriate. The change was subtle at first. Lingering glances during family dinners, unnecessary touches when passing documents, conversations that drifted from international politics to personal philosophies and private aspirations. The Diplomat suggested a regular weekly meeting to discuss the young woman's career development. These sessions, initially held in public cafes near the university campus, provided structure and legitimacy to their growing connection. His daughter, focused on her own studies and social life, thought nothing of these meetings. After all, her father had mentored other promising students in the past. As Hong Kong's political atmosphere intensified with the approaching handover, these meetings became more frequent and less public. The Diplomat began suggesting venues farther from campus. Quiet restaurants in Central District, private clubs where he held membership, and occasionally his office when he claimed to be working late. Each location shift moved them further from casual observation and deeper into a world of shared secrets. If you're finding this story as shocking as we did when researching it, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Your engagement helps us continue bringing these real-life cautionary tales to light. Leave a comment with your thoughts on how someone in such a respected position could risk everything this way. By April, their conversations had little to do with academics or career guidance. Personal confessions replaced professional advice. The Diplomat began sharing frustrations about his marriage, complaints about his wife's supposed lack of intellectual curiosity, her focus on social obligations rather than substantive diplomatic work. These intimate revelations created artificial intimacy and established a narrative where he appeared misunderstood and underappreciated. You understand the nuances of international relations better than many career diplomats, he told her during one private dinner. My wife never really grasped the complexities of the work I do. Such statements served dual purposes, flattering the young woman's intelligence while positioning his wife as an inadequate partner. This classic manipulation technique worked effectively. The young woman began to see herself as uniquely capable of appreciating his brilliance and the challenges he faced. The power imbalance in this relationship cannot be overstated. He was nearly 30 years her senior, with decades of experience navigating complex human relationships. As a senior diplomat, he represented British authority in Hong Kong, the very embodiment of the political structures she studied. Her family, while prominent in local banking circles, operated within systems that British colonial administration had shaped for generations. Moreover, he controlled access to professional networks that could determine her future career. Each introduction to influential figures came with an implicit message. These opportunities flowed through him and could disappear just as easily. Perhaps most significantly, he was her roommate's father, a position of trust that should have placed her firmly off limits. Yet this familial connection provided the perfect cover for regular contact, while simultaneously adding the intoxicating element of forbidden attraction. By May, they had established elaborate routines to conceal their meetings. He maintained a secondary office in the diplomatic compound, ostensibly for confidential work, where they could meet without signing visitor logs. She told her roommate she had joined an evening study group, explaining her absences from their shared accommodation. Both developed coded language for phone communications in case others were present. The Diplomat became expert at creating plausible excuses for scheduled changes and unexpected absences. Late-night, emergency meetings related to handover preparations provided perfect cover for extended encounters. His security clearance allowed him to move through diplomatic properties without questioning, enabling him to arrange meetings in locations where few would recognize either of them. How did he justify these actions to himself? Former colleagues suggest his exceptional career had fostered a dangerous sense of immunity. Success had convinced him that rules were for ordinary people. One Foreign Office contemporary noted, he'd navigated so many complex political situations successfully that personal ethics became just another problem to manage rather than principles to uphold. His internal narrative likely framed the affair as a special case deserving exception. He wasn't like other men having tawdry affairs. This was an intellectual connection, a meeting of minds that transcended conventional boundaries. He convinced himself he could contain any consequences through the same diplomatic skills that had resolved international incidents throughout his career. Compartmentalization became his primary psychological strategy. The respected diplomat, devoted family man, and trusted mentor existed in one mental space. The man pursuing an inappropriate relationship with his daughter's roommate existed in another. These identities never needed to confront each other, as long as he maintained strict boundaries between them. For a part, the young woman experienced a complex mix of emotions, professional admiration blended with personal attraction. The thrill of being chosen by someone so accomplished mingled with genuine intellectual connection. The secret nature of their relationship added excitement, while isolating her from honest feedback from friends who might have questioned her choices. By June 1997, weeks before the handover ceremony that would end British rule in Hong Kong, their affair had intensified beyond either's ability to control. What began as flattering attention from a powerful man had evolved into an all-consuming attachment that clouded judgment on both sides. The diplomat grew increasingly reckless, suggesting meetings in locations where discovery became more likely. The young woman, increasingly emotionally invested, began pressing for acknowledgement of their relationship's significance. Neither recognized they were constructing an elaborate fantasy that could not survive exposure to reality. This willful blindness to ethical boundaries, professional consequences, and inevitable human cost set the stage for the spectacular collapse that would follow. Throughout the spring of 1997, as the affair intensified, the diplomat's wife and daughter remained completely unaware of the betrayal unfolding within their family circle. This blindness wasn't a result of willful ignorance, but rather a perfect storm of circumstances that created ideal conditions for deception. The diplomat's wife had recently recommitted to her professional identity after years of prioritizing her husband's career advancement. With the handover approaching, British cultural institutions in Hong Kong scrambled to establish legacy projects that would maintain British influence post-transition. Her expertise in cultural diplomacy made her invaluable to these efforts, and she accepted a position coordinating a major Anglo-Chinese arts exchange program. This professional renaissance consumed her attention, her calendar filled with planning meetings, site visits to galleries and performance spaces, and endless networking events with Hong Kong's cultural elite, often returning home exhausted after 12-hour workdays. She had little energy to notice subtle changes in her husband's behavior. "I was so focused on ensuring British cultural heritage remained relevant in post-handover Hong Kong," she later told a close friend. "The irony isn't lost on me. While I worked to preserve Britain's legacy abroad, my own marriage was collapsing beneath my feet." The wife's renewed career focus coincided with increased social obligations tied to the handover ceremonies. As the wife of a senior diplomat, she was expected to host farewell gatherings for departing British officials and welcome receptions for incoming Chinese counterparts. These events required meticulous planning, from guest lists that navigated complex political sensitivities to menu selections that honor both British and Chinese traditions. Her husband's increasingly frequent absences barely registered against this backdrop of professional and social demands. When he mentioned late meetings related to handover security protocols or commercial interest protections, she had no reason to question these explanations. Their marriage had always included periods of intense professional commitment that limited personal time. The diplomat's daughter, meanwhile, lived in a unique bubble that university creates. Physically present in Hong Kong, but mentally absorbed in her own academic and social world. Her relationship with her father had always been one of admiration rather than close confidences. She viewed him as an accomplished professional figure, someone whose career provided a model of success rather than an emotionally accessible parent. When her roommate expressed interest in international relations and diplomacy, introducing her to her father seemed natural. That her father took an interest in mentoring her friend appeared to be an extension of his professional generosity, far from suspecting inappropriate behavior. The daughter felt proud of her father's willingness to guide a promising student. "My father has always believed in supporting women in diplomacy," she told another friend. There are so few female ambassadors. He's always said talent shouldn't be wasted because of gender barriers. This perception of her father as a progressive mentor blinded her to the possibility of ulterior motives. When her roommate mentioned meetings with her father, the daughter encouraged these connections, believing they represented valuable professional opportunities. She unknowingly became an enabler of the very relationship that would ultimately destroy her family. Family dynamics further facilitated the deception. Years of diplomatic postings had created a household accustomed to independence and privacy. Each family member maintained separate schedules, separate social circles, and increasingly separate lives connected primarily through their shared residence and status. Communication focused on logistics rather than emotions. Who would attend which event? When official functions required family presence, how to manage household staff during busy periods. These practical conversations left little room for deeper check-ins that might have revealed concerning behavioral changes. Warning signs, visible only in retrospect, went unnoticed. The diplomat's sudden interest in his appearance, new tailored suits, an updated hairstyle, increased attention to fitness. His newfound enthusiasm for technology that facilitated private communications. A personal mobile phone he guarded closely, a separate email account for confidential work. His inexplicable mood swings. Periods of unusual cheerfulness followed by distracted irritability when plans changed unexpectedly. Perhaps most tellingly, his sudden attentiveness toward his daughter's academic life, asking specific questions about her class schedule and her roommate's academic progress, represented a departure from his typically distant parenting style. What appeared to be welcome paternal interest was actually surveillance designed to track the roommate's movements and create opportunities for contact. The household staff noticed these changes but hesitated to voice concerns. In the hierarchical world of diplomatic households, questioning the behavior of one's employer could jeopardize not just employment but visa status. One housekeeper later admitted noticing the diplomat taking late-night calls in his study with the door locked, speaking in hushed tones, but dismissing these observations as simply related to sensitive diplomatic matters. Through this combination of professional distraction, innocent trust, and household dynamics designed for privacy rather than transparency, the family unwittingly provided the perfect environment for betrayal to flourish undetected. By early summer 1997, just weeks before the handover ceremony, the carefully constructed secrecy surrounding the affair began to crack. In diplomatic communities worldwide, gossip functions as both currency and intelligence. Information shared over cocktails often proves as valuable as official cables. Hong Kong's British diplomatic enclave was no exception. The first whispers emerged at a reception hosted by the Australian consulate. A junior trade attaché mentioned seeing the diplomat and a young woman dining at an exclusive restaurant in Aberdeen, far from official venues and noticeably intimate in their conversation. Another diplomat spouse recalled spotting them walking closely together through a quiet garden in Victoria Park, their body language suggesting more than professional mentorship. These isolated observations might have remained meaningless anecdotes had they not accumulated with suspicious frequency. A pattern emerged. Sightings of the pair in locations with no apparent professional purpose, at times that couldn't be justified by legitimate meetings, displaying comfort levels inappropriate for their respective positions. The diplomat's colleague at the commercial office first approached him with carefully couched concerns. "People are beginning to notice your interest in this student," he warned during a private moment between meetings. Perhaps it would be prudent to maintain more professional boundaries. The diplomat dismissed these concerns with practiced diplomatic deflection. "The young woman has exceptional potential for foreign service. I'm simply providing the same guidance I would offer any promising candidate. People will always misinterpret mentorship of female protégés. That kind of outdated thinking is precisely why women remain underrepresented in our field." This response, positioning himself as a progressive champion rather than potential transgressor, effectively silenced initial concerns. Few colleagues wanted to risk appearing reactionary or sexist by pressing the issue further. His seniority and respected position provided additional insulation from scrutiny. Who would dare question the judgment of one of Britain's most accomplished diplomats in Hong Kong? What would you do if you discovered such betrayal in your family or workplace? Let us know in the comments below. Would you confront the situation directly or seek outside help? Your perspective helps build our community of thoughtful viewers, examining the complex moral dilemmas these true stories present. As June progressed and handover preparations intensified, both participants in the affair grew increasingly careless. The heightened emotional state produced by their relationship, combined with the general atmosphere of impending change, created a dangerous sense of impunity. Hong Kong itself existed in a transitional limbo, British authority waning daily as Chinese influence grew, creating an environment where normal constraints seemed increasingly irrelevant. The Diplomat began taking unnecessary risks. Rather than maintaining their established meeting protocols, he suggested increasingly public venues. They were spotted at a jazz club in Wan Chai, seated in a dark corner, but still visible to anyone who might recognize them. He arranged for her to attend diplomatic functions where her presence couldn't be justified professionally. In a particularly bold move, he requested the embassy driver take her home after one such event, creating an official record of their connection. The young woman, increasingly emotionally invested, pushed for acknowledgement rather than concealment. She sent hand-delivered notes to his office, called his private line during business hours, and once appeared unannounced at a public forum where he was speaking. These actions, born from genuine attachment rather than strategic thinking, created a trail of evidence impossible to ignore. By mid-June, rumors had reached beyond diplomatic circles to intersect with Hong Kong's expatriate business community. At a Chamber of Commerce luncheon, a banking executive directly asked the diplomat about his special relationship with a certain university student. The question, posed casually but within earshot of others, marked the first public acknowledgement of what had been merely private speculation. The diplomat's response, a cold stare and abrupt change of subject, only confirmed suspicions. As one witness later noted, an innocent man would have shown confusion rather than anger. His reaction told us everything we needed to know. Days later, a more serious confrontation occurred when the British Consul General requested a private meeting. Though no official record exists of this conversation, sources indicate the consul expressed grave concerns about behavior potentially compromising the British interests during the sensitive transition period. The diplomat reportedly responded with indignation, questioning the consul's authority to interfere in his personal affairs and implying political motivations behind the accusations. He leveraged his direct connections to senior Foreign Office officials in London, suggesting any formal action would meet resistance from his powerful allies. This confrontation temporarily halted official inquiry, but accelerated unofficial surveillance. Several colleagues began documenting the diplomat's movements, partly from genuine concern for British interests and partly from a universal human fascination with potential scandal. His scheduled visitors and absences were noted with unprecedented attention. When finally confronted by a longtime friend who offered an opportunity to address the rumors before they reached his family, the diplomat made a fatal miscalculation. Rather than acknowledging any impropriety, he doubled down on denial, attacking the integrity of those raising concerns. "This is nothing but jealousy and political maneuvering," he insisted. "Those who can't attack my professional record attempt to smear my personal character instead." This blanket denial, combined with his unwillingness to modify behavior, set the stage for the devastating public exposure that would follow. On July 1st, 1997, as the world's attention focused on the historic handover ceremony at the Hong Kong Convention Center, a local tabloid published what would become infamous photographs on page 3. The timing could not have been more devastating, or more calculated for maximum impact. These images showed the diplomat and the young woman in unmistakably intimate situations, emerging from a boutique hotel in Kowloon at dawn, sharing what was clearly not a professional embrace on a secluded beach, dining at a romantic restaurant with hands intertwined across the table. The photos, grainy but identifiable, had been taken over several weeks by a freelance photographer who specialized in celebrity exposés. The tabloid headline pulled no punches. "British diplomat's secret affair with student half his age." The accompanying article included damning details: times, locations, frequency of meetings. Most devastating was the revelation that the young woman was his daughter's university roommate. Information that transformed what might have been dismissed as a commonplace indiscretion into a profound betrayal on multiple levels. Within hours, international wire services picked up the story. What began as a local scandal quickly escalated to international news, amplified by the global media presence already in Hong Kong for the handover. The timing created a perfect storm. Journalists searching for human interest angles amid the political ceremony suddenly found a salacious diplomatic scandal served on a silver platter. The diplomat's first response was characteristic of his profession: absolute denial coupled with suggestions of political motivation. Through an embassy spokesperson, he released a brief statement. These allegations are categorically false. The photographs have been manipulated and taken out of context. This appears to be a calculated attempt to undermine British diplomatic integrity during this historic transition. This statement proved disastrously inadequate. By mid-afternoon, additional media outlets had obtained their own evidence, including hotel receipts, restaurant staff testimony, and most damaging brief video footage showing the pair entering a private residence together. As evidence mounted, the diplomat attempted direct damage control. He contacted influential media figures with whom he had cultivated relationships, calling in favors to minimize coverage. He reached out to the young woman, instructing her to remain completely silent and unavailable. He even approached the tabloid publisher offering an exclusive interview on handover politics if they would retract the story, a suggestion that was promptly leaked to competing publications. By evening, the British Foreign Office in London had taken control of the situation. A terse official statement announced the diplomat would return to London for consultations regarding transition protocols following the handover ceremony. This transparent attempt to create distance between the scandal and ongoing diplomatic functions only intensified media interest. The diplomat was notified of his immediate recall while attending a post-handover reception. Witnesses described a moment a Foreign Office messenger delivered the directive. His face drained of color as he read the brief note, then composed himself with visible effort before making excuses to leave. This public removal, humiliating in its visibility, marked the beginning of a professional destruction. His wife learned of the affair not through her husband's confession, but from a diplomatic colleague's hurried warning minutes before the story broke publicly. This final betrayal, being denied even the dignity of a private admission, cemented her decision to end their marriage. By the time the diplomat returned to their residence to pack for London, she had already moved to separate quarters within the diplomatic compound and instructed household staff not to admit him to her presence. The British Airways flight to London the following morning became a media spectacle. Photographers crowded the terminal as the diplomat was escorted through a private security channel, his face rigid with forced composure. The image of him boarding alone, his official career and family life simultaneously collapsing, appeared on newspaper front pages worldwide. Upon landing at Heathrow, he was met not by family but by stern-faced Foreign Office security personnel who escorted him directly to Whitehall. There, the formal investigation process began with immediate suspension of duties, pending inquiry. His diplomatic passport was confiscated, his security clearances revoked, and his access to government buildings restricted to scheduled interview appointments only. The Foreign Office investigation proceeded with unprecedented speed. Typically, diplomatic scandals were handled with discretion, investigations conducted behind closed doors to minimize public attention. But this case, because of its timing against the Hong Kong handover and its multiple violations of trust, received different treatment. A senior investigative team interviewed embassy staff, diplomatic colleagues, household employees, and eventually, the young woman herself. Their findings detailed not merely the inappropriate relationship, but accompanying professional misconduct, misuse of diplomatic vehicles, unauthorized access to secure facilities for personal purposes, and most seriously, potential security vulnerabilities created by undocumented meetings. The young woman's testimony proved particularly damning. Initially reluctant to speak, she eventually provided investigators with emails, handwritten notes, and details of conversations that revealed the calculated nature of the diplomat's approach. What emerged was not a spontaneous indiscretion, but a methodical pursuit conducted with full awareness of professional boundaries being violated. Public fascination with the scandal grew rather than diminished in subsequent weeks. British tabloids published inside accounts from anonymous embassy sources. Sunday magazines ran feature articles analyzing the psychology of power and betrayal. Television news programs commissioned experts to discuss the impact on Anglo-Chinese relations during the sensitive transition period. The scandal provided perfect tabloid fodder, combining elements of power, sex, betrayal, and international politics. The diplomat's previous reputation for impeccable judgment made his downfall all the more compelling narrative. As one columnist noted, his career was built on understanding the nuances of international relations, yet he catastrophically misunderstood the most basic relations within his own family circle. By August, what began as salacious gossip had transformed into a serious examination of diplomatic culture, power dynamics, and accountability in public service. Parliamentary questions were raised about oversight of diplomatic personnel and the handling of misconduct allegations. Women's groups highlighted the case as an example of power imbalance and exploitation within professional mentoring relationships. What the diplomat had dismissed as a private matter had become, through his own actions and subsequent mishandling, a very public referendum on personal and professional ethics in public service. The formal dissolution of the diplomat's marriage proceeded with remarkable efficiency. His wife, herself familiar with navigating bureaucratic systems, filed divorce papers within weeks of the scandal breaking. She cited unreasonable behavior rather than adultery, a tactical choice that limited the public documentation of specific transgressions while still ensuring rapid legal separation. Court records show the divorce was finalized in near record time, with financial settlements heavily favoring the wife. The diplomat, his professional reputation in tatters and legal fees mounting, offered minimal resistance to her claims. The family home in Hampshire, properties in London and the south of France, and the majority of their joint investments transferred to her name by the year's end. More devastating than the financial and legal consequences was a complete estrangement from his daughter. Upon learning of her father's betrayal with her roommate, she cut communication entirely. When required to provide a statement for the Foreign Office investigation, she submitted written testimony through legal representatives rather than appearing in person to avoid any contact with her father. The betrayal was exponential, explained a university counselor who worked with her during this period. Not just her father's infidelity to her mother, but the violation of her own social space, the manipulation of her trust, the exploitation of someone she had brought into their family circle as a friend. The daughter transferred to Edinburgh University the following term, changed her surname to her mother's maiden name, and declined all interview requests. Friends reported she removed all photographs of her father from her possession and referred to him, on the rare occasions he was mentioned, as the diplomat rather than my father. For the young woman at the center of the affair, the consequences proved equally severe but took different forms. Following her testimony to Foreign Office investigators, she withdrew from university and disappeared entirely from public view. Her prominent Hong Kong family, humiliated by the scandal's exposure, reportedly arranged for her immediate relocation to Vancouver, where distant relatives could provide housing without media attention. Academic records indicate she never completed her degree. Attempts by journalists to track her subsequent life revealed only that she legally changed her name in 1998 and has maintained strict privacy since. Former classmates lost all contact with her, and even social media searches decades later yield no clear connections to her former identity. She was a casualty of unequal power, noted a university administrator years later. A brilliant young woman whose academic promise and future potential became collateral damage in someone else's moral failure. The diplomat's professional destruction was absolute and irreversible. The Foreign Office investigation concluded with his formal dismissal from diplomatic service, loss of pension benefits, and permanent revocation of security clearances. The official report, portions of which were eventually made public through Freedom of Information requests, cited grave misconduct unbecoming a representative of Her Majesty's government and sustained deception incompatible with the trust required for diplomatic service. Following his dismissal, he attempted to leverage his international connections for private sector positions, but doors that would normally open for former diplomats remained firmly closed. Former colleagues, wary of association with scandal, declined meetings and ignored correspondence. The diplomatic community, which had been a professional home for decades, enacted a quiet but comprehensive excommunication. Financial records show he eventually secured modest employment with a small import-export firm specializing in Asian markets, working not as an executive but in middle management. A precipitous fall from his former status. Public appearances ceased entirely, and he declined all interview requests regarding both his former career and the scandal that ended it. For more stories of betrayal and consequence, including our upcoming series on public figures who lost everything through personal misconduct, subscribe to True Crime Stories and hit that notification bell. Your subscription helps us research and produce these in-depth examinations of human failure and its lasting impact. The true measure of the scandal lies not in the salacious details that initially captured public attention, but in the permanent alteration of 4 lives. A distinguished diplomatic career ended in disgrace. A family unit shattered beyond repair. A young woman's promising future derailed. A daughter's fundamental trust in parental figures damaged, perhaps beyond healing. What began with small compromises, a mentorship relationship that crossed appropriate boundaries, private communications that should have remained professional, meetings without legitimate purpose, cascaded into comprehensive destruction. The diplomat's choices reflected a fundamental misconception that his position, intelligence, and careful management could somehow contain the consequences of betrayal. In the years following the scandal, the Foreign Office implemented more stringent oversight policies regarding mentorship relationships and private meetings between senior diplomats and students. These institutional changes stand as perhaps the only constructive outcome of an otherwise tragic story, a cautionary tale of how quickly poor choices can unravel even the most carefully constructed life's work.